Today is Census Day, the deadline for everyone in England, Wales and Northern Ireland to fill in and submit their census forms. Scotland gets its turn next year. Every 10 years, households are asked to fill in a questionnaire about everyone living at their property. And this year, you can do it online for the first time. Well, there are questions about age, ethnicity, qualifications, occupation and relationship status. And all this information helps the country plan for the services and infrastructure that we're going to need. And for the third time, there's a voluntary question about your religion. Do you have a religion? And if so, tick one from the list provided, or you can tick the no religion box. Well, the first time this question was asked in 2001, 72% of us ticked the Christian box. 2011, 59%. The numbers saying they had no religion rose from 15% to 25%, and this trend is expected to continue. The more frequent British Social Attitude Survey of religion found 52% now say they have no religion, and only 38% identify as Christians. Has religion had its day? Pastor Mick, has organised religion had its day?
Well, so for me, yes. I think the structures and the church have made themselves irrelevant. They blend in to society, a broken society. There isn't a voice, there isn't a gospel message that people understand, and for me...
it's all smells and bells and flummery, is it? All that stuff?
Well, to some degree, but yeah. I think somebody would want to know where's action in faith when my children are going hungry? Where's action in faith in a pandemic when I can't bury me dead and Christian ministers are charging me 200 quid to do it? Where's that?
Well, you're helping on the street. What you're doing on the street is incredible.
Yeah, so we work on that basis, but what I'm saying is that there's a gospel that separates people from sin, from the defectiveness of who and what they are, and that message isn't being understood and preached very well in organised structural church. It's an internal faith, it's not the external, and the change can only come from that.
How did Jesus find you, or did you find Jesus?
He found me.
How did that happen?
Blimey. I was...
in a sentence.
Yeah, I was a debt collector, a drug debt collector, and I was about to do a very bad thing, and I had an experience, and my life changed, yeah.
Wow.
In a sentence.
That's a good sentence. What about values then? Why is this happening? Andrew Copson, why is this happening? Why is there this slow, albeit steady decline? Are we all humanists now?
Well, it's definitely the case that, as we've heard, all the traditional measures of religion are declining. So, you know, religious attendance at places of worship has gone through the floor, christenings have gone through the floor. For the first time ever now in the last few years, even most funerals, which was the sort of last resort of organised religion, even now most funerals are non-religious. And I think that it's what people say in surveys and other instruments is that religion no longer performs any function for them in making sense of the universe. Instead, they look to, as we all have in the last years, to science as a way of understanding things. Religion doesn't offer much in the way of values development. Instead, they look around to the culture, to their families and friends, to their own experiences, instincts, and you know, whether it's soap operas or literature or whatever. And it doesn't offer much to them in ways of community and belonging. They found different ways of belonging, different ways of making community. So I think that if you want to pose the question in that negative way, has religion had its day, it's definitely of diminishing importance, almost down to zero for most people. The more positive case that you've just asked, we're all sort of humanists now, that I think is not completely the case, but it is the case that humanist values have had enormous success in the last few decades.
OK, one sentence time. I did it with Mick, and it was so you've got quite a challenge here to better his sentence. Yeah. Humanist values in a sentence.
Finding the source of meaning and goodness and truth in humanity and our experiences and what we mean to each other, rather than in some external source.
Yeah, doing well. Doing well. Linda Woodhead, welcome back to the big questions. Now, the Pope this week, that was a thing. The Pope basically said, or was in accord with the doctrine that the Catholic Church cannot bless same-sex couples because you cannot bless sin. That's a very interesting example, isn't it, of organised religion coming out with something that is at the heart of their doctrine. You know, Pope Benedict talked about the intrinsic evil in homosexuality. That is something that it's so out of kilter with so many young people, middle-aged people, old people in this country who are Catholics, that they will just ignore it, won't they?
They will, Nicky, and you're right that it's the failure around values, I think, that has been so damaging to the churches, particularly in this country, and well, not every country. Let's not forget, in some parts of the world, the churches and other religions are doing well. But religion isn't just about values. Religion is a kind of package. It has lots of things. On the values front, I completely agree with you. Young people see the churches as sexist and homophobic on the whole. You know, the value of equality, which we've just been talking about in relation to women, is not a value that it's been like a fishbone that's stuck in the throat of the churches. They haven't really been able to get behind equality. And yet, as a society, we really believe in equality. But values, they've gone off. You know, we all know we can be ethical without religion. People are very good at value statements now. Every business, every school, you know, we do values without religion. But don't forget, religion does other things too. One thing is it puts people in touch with higher powers, spirit, God, beings, forces that sustain you, however you conceive them. And another thing is that religion traditionally and still gives people a sense of who they are, both as individually, as families and collectively. And we mustn't forget that in this country, the churches gave people a very strong sense of who they were as a family, were people who were baptised, but also of being English, of being Scottish, of being Welsh, of being British, of being Irish. Churches had those big identity functions, and I think that they've rather failed for majorities to keep doing that. Not true of minorities, of course. So Islam is still growing. I expect it will grow more in the next census. And for many minority communities that really have to stand up for themselves and hold together, they do still use religion as a means of doing that. It's an important part of what it is.
That sense of identity, yeah, often in defiance of great hostility. But I was in hospital and the lady in front of me was filling in a form and they said, "What religion are you?" And she said, "Catholic, I suppose." She said, "But I don't believe any of that stuff." I think a lot of people are there, but what you're saying seems to also denote a feeling of, rather than religion, of spirituality, right? You know?
Yes.
Yeah?
So spirituality is doing pretty well. You know, we yoga, Reiki, the language of holism, mind, body, spirit, it's all part of the culture now. It's probably much more familiar to younger people than Christian concepts like resurrection and atonement. And it's, you know, complementary and alternative medicine. About half of people access it at some time in their lives. It's often got a kind of spiritual, metaphysical underpinning. I'm not sure Andrew's right that humanism is the value now. I think I think life, spirit, these sorts of concepts have crept in. And amongst my students, amongst young people, things like astrology and tarot are incredibly popular at the moment. And just this sense that there are forces bigger than ourselves that we can get into connection with, that's not gone away.
It used to be regarded as dark forces, all that stuff. It's, you know, a lot of the stuff you said is that people believe in is hokum. I won't completely identify which was which, otherwise we'll have a problem. But Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to get involved in a big debate with a sociologist about what the data says, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, or an astrologist. I don't think Lynn does that.
Astrologer, yeah.
But, I mean, when I'm talking about, like, the humanist view and and a religious view, I suppose, what I'm using it as shorthand for is the same sort of thing that George Orwell used it for shorthand for. Do you care about this life? Is it about meaning in this life, seeking meaning in this life, finding your values here and now with humanity, making sense of the world through your own reasons and senses? Or do you believe there's another world? Are you labouring for another life to come? Are you getting your values from outside? Are you following commandments or finding community with your co-religionists? And in those two big dynamics, which have coloured the history of our entire species with different cultural differences in different parts of the world, I think it's definitely the case that the humanist portion is growing. I don't say that in a sort of supremacist or a victorious sense, but I think it is a fact, yeah.
Yeah, well, we should all keep open minds, or as Carl Sagan said, have an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out. Mariam, what about the organised religions in you know, young people's values? lots of people's values, but young people specifically, as regards what Grace mentioned earlier on in our audience, you know, concern for trans rights, LGBT rights, women's rights. You know, a lot of the organised religions are hostile to all of those. There's a dissonance.
Right. So with regards to this question, I feel that rather than saying religion has had its day, what we should be saying is that the nature in which religion is manifest in our societies or expressed or practiced has changed. And that's really important. And secondly, you're quite right, there's certain, firstly, we can't say that religion is a monolith, that all religions are the same, or, you know, that's really important. And values can stem from faiths or from beliefs. So it's really important to acknowledge this. And with regards to this point about LGBT plus rights, I think I said this last time on your show as well, that you can be someone who is LGBT plus identifying and have a faith. And that's something that's really important.
But
the
faiths,
intersections of identities need to be acknowledged.
The monotheistic faiths, many of them, or large proportions of them, are hostile to you. If you're a trans woman, if you're a trans man, if you're a gay person, and you are not welcomed. Look at what we said about the Pope this week. You cannot bless sin. We hear that in Islam a lot, we hear it in Catholicism, we hear it in Protestantism, we hear it in Judaism. That's a problem for young people.
It most certainly is. And I think what we need to realise is that there are people within these communities who are practising of their faith, and they're also quite progressive. And it's important that when we talk about these issues, we don't sideline or negate their existence. So, for example, many people who are being vilified for being LGBT might also be practising Muslims, Christians, Jews, etc. So what the important part is that instead of fixating on the conflict, we move forward and talk about how we can converge, how these values, not where they stem from, but essentially how can we make a better and more prosperous society that is accepting of all without stigmatizing certain individuals. And also, finally, accepting that some people will always have conservative values or more liberal values. And this is a massive spectrum. And what we ought to be doing is understanding that none of those beliefs impede on other people's rights of existence or expressions of their identity.
Well, yeah, I mean, Andrew, interesting we're hearing Mariam there and say there are LGBT plus people, for example, in Islam and other religions, but we've spoken to so many faith-to-faith people, and, for example, if Mariam mentioned Islam, ex-Muslims who feel that they were driven out of their religion, and it can happen in other religions, and it does happen, and it's absolutely tragic.
Yeah, that's right. And although it's true to say, and we shouldn't forget because it's the place we'll find allies, it's certainly true to say, as we've just heard, that there are people with religious identities and deeply held religious beliefs who are also, you know, in favour of liberation, in favour of equality. That tends not to correlate with religion. And religions as structures are responsible, have been responsible for a huge amount of, as Linda was saying, discrimination and anti-equality. And I think that on the whole, they tend still to be mostly sources of that rather than sources of liberation and equality. I mean, and I think that actually, you know, the humanistic values that I talked about have influenced religions, and that has led some religious people to be more equality-minded. But I don't personally think that's coming from inside the religion. I think it's coming from the environment.
And there were humanistic values before there were religions.
Exactly. I think they're co-options of humanistic values.
Right. Oh, listen, look at that. Look at all those hands up. I think I did see a dog collar somewhere. Yeah, David. Hello. You might have something to say about this. Welcome.
Yes, very interesting. Yes. Well, the Christian position is that that there is a moral law that actually comes from God.
Which Christian position is this? There are many. I mean, that.
Well, it's like, for example, the word is the true light that gives light to every man.
Okay.
In John's Gospel, and also Paul the Apostle talks about the Gentiles having the requirements of the law written on their heart. So there's that sense of moral awareness that comes from God. And the concern I have, listening to secular assumptions, is that what happens is that you take, the secular argument tends to take, especially through the 20th century, we have to be very wary of this, is to take one aspect of the moral law and make it all important at the expense of other aspects. So I'll give you an example, communism, which is good in the sense of the impulse of the moral law to want to give poor people more material wealth and so forth, and to help them, but also for people to benefit from their own labours. But the way that secular ideology failed was to not take into account other aspects of the moral law, such as forceful redistribution of wealth.
Well, okay.
And also it's been called the politics of envy. And so cutting across the 10th commandment.
There isn't a lot of redistribution of wealth in, for example, Catholic societies. And also, it is interesting that where there is a void, another religion moves in, because, of course, these were belief systems. You know, the Nazis used a lot of pagan mysticism and mentions of God, and communism was a quasi-religion as well, wasn't it, with a happy ever after of a paradise on earth, and other religions specifically believe in a paradise on earth. So maybe we're talking about values, Linda. We're also, and I'll come to more audience in a second, we're also talking about that human need to explain and understand, which leads to belief systems, very often very rigid belief systems.
Well, it can do, but you're being a bit unfair here, Nicky. I mean, religion for many people is about a real deep experience and sense of connection with something larger than them. I'm not saying everybody has that, but that's a feature of all societies right throughout history. And the simplest explanation of that is that there simply are forces beyond us and higher than us that we feel some connection with.
I don't deny that. I'm, merely trying to ask big questions. So, who else?
But it's very easy to discriminate against religion. Religion is the one thing you can be rude about. And actually, we can laugh about that, and we do laugh about anyone who says they're spiritual. There's a huge stigma, but it's really hard on some people. Imagine being a Muslim in a university with a widespread secularism. Yeah, of course, traditionally, it was religions that gave people who were not of those religions a hard time, but there are all sorts of societal and sociological reasons for that as well. Ahmed.
So what you guys touched on is pretty relevant, especially at this time and age. Like for myself, I wouldn't want to be not classified in a religion just because one aspect of my life might contradict this religion. I believe that a balance should be struck between understanding what morals you want to follow and what teachings you want to be going through. On my personal experience, I've been through certain circumstances that a lot of people, if they went through, they would feel that they could be out of faith, they could be left alone, stripped out of their culture, stripped out of their families or homes, and just are alone in this world. So I felt like I couldn't abandon my religion in a certain way. However, I could come about it in a more balanced, healthy way that would, as a person, make me a person of reason, a person of consciousness to everything around me. And moving onward, I will be a productive human in society. And that is what I believe is what we need as any person have the right to choose what religion they want to follow, in addition to what they could balance it out based on their own experience and what they have been through. And in this way they would achieve their own kind of peace that will make them move forward in society and make them more conscious to what is going and happening around them. And this could be relevant to so many issues, especially the issues discussed earlier today.
And to talk about it's actually not too far from what Linda says as well. Look, Linda was saying about values, the values that you essentially hold dear and help you make sense of everything. Simon, quick one from you.
Hi, Nicky. Yeah, I guess I want to bring it back to the premise of the argument, which is about religion has its day, and you started by talking about the census. It's not necessarily the notion that religion itself is a problem, but the privilege which religion has afforded people is a problem. And I think that, in a sense, is the root, perhaps, of the end of formalised religions as we know it, and to what Andrew Copson was talking about. You know, so the privilege of having sitting bishops in the House of Lords, you know, the privilege of faith-based education being available to the few, but not to the many. The privilege of the church commissioners who are sitting on £8 billion worth of investment. You know, these are the privileges which have been afforded organised religion, and I think these are the things that are going to, in some way, undermine it as we move towards an increasingly secular world.
Yeah, Pastor Mick, that's an interesting point, though, isn't it?
I'd agree. I would agree to some degree, because if we're holding funds whilst people are going hungry, it's not really good news for the poor. And the gospel of Jesus Christ is good news for the poor. So I think it's for the church to live out the teachings of Jesus, not to take the teachings of Jesus to hold and to keep. I think it's the gospel's teaching powerlessness, not power.
Ella?
Well, I have a sort of particular perspective of this, having been brought up Catholic and am now somewhat of a failed Irish Catholic.
What were you? You know, we're all failed.
Well, yeah.
What are you going to put on the census? What religion are you?
Well, I'm not religious any longer because I got involved in politics.
What are you going to put?
I'm non-religious. I think I've already done it, so I think I've put non-religious. But you know, I'm not a humanist, but I'd have a different debate with those who are, I think, characterising communism as a different kind of belief system. I think politically I wanted to move away from religion because I thought that the power in shaping one's life came from political engagement and agency. And one of the things that I really agreed with Linda talking about is that there is the positive aspect of religion, I think, organised or otherwise, is this sense that you kind of transcend your own individual experience to something that is bigger than yourself, whether that's a notion of, you know, a voice in the sky, to put it crudely, or whether it's a sense of a collective. And I think today, the problem is we haven't necessarily moved away from religion to what I would view as a more progressive sense of a political collective, but in fact we have become more individualised in many ways. I think you can see in terms of identity politics, or some of the issues that we've described today, that there is a kind of a move towards the actions of organised religion. So whether it be casting some things as outside of debate, whether it be proselytising about certain political views, and in particular whether it be
communism and Nazism, for example,
and seeing things as sinful, you know, saying certain things as sinful, and people being burnt at the stake, metaphorically, for their political views. What I'd like to capture is how we can, the positive things from religion about seeing yourself as part of a bigger thing than just your own individual experience, but turning that into a political perspective which is focused around agency. I think that's, you know, the reason why I mentioned that I'm a failed Catholic is because I wouldn't castigate all aspects of that experience that I had, because part of it, of being brought up with a certain sense of values and a certain sense of things being bigger than oneself, the meaning in life, is very positive.
That's an interesting word, finally, Linda, isn't it? Somebody's there saying, Ella's saying, I'm a failed Catholic. I failed. I didn't live up to this.
By choice. Failed by choice.
But the language is interesting. Last thought, Linda.
Yeah, but she was also making an interesting point, which is that it's not that we have all suddenly become secular scientific. That was the belief in one way, wasn't it? Religion would decline and we'd realise that all we needed was science, and then there would be endless progress. Well, we've given up on that belief as well. So I think we've given up that faith as well as blind faith in religion, and in a moment of change and reflecting and becoming more independent in the way we deal with both religion and science.
OK, well, there's been a lot of progress, though, but thank you very much indeed, Linda. As always, the debates will continue online. This is our last show of the series, so hopefully we'll see you again with an audience and a haircut. Have a great summer and stay safe.